Hi there, Fidel. How are you doing today?
I am well. Thank you very much for having me, Andrew.
Of course, thank you for coming back. So the last time we saw you was American Nurse Heroes in 2021. Can you give us a little rundown of what's been going on since American Nurse Heroes came out?
Well, my exposure with the American Nurse Heroes documentary has opened up a lot of opportunities for me. Uh, One thing, it was a great honor for me to be selected amongst many, many nurses out there who are doing great work, more than I could claim for myself. So, um, I love sharing the movie with my students. So it gives me a different perspective. So each time I watch this movie and documentary, I've seen it many times, and it's a great feeling to be able to share something. So yeah.
Fantastic. So in the documentary, they were following you as you were teaching for NYU. And
Mhm.
what we were wondering is obviously the COVID pandemic is now over. Well, not over, but the WHO and President Biden have declared the emergency over it, while the
Mhm.
pandemic is still keeping the pandemic name. I was wondering, what are some of the practices that you implemented while teaching during the emergency that you've found out to be helpful and useful for post-pandemic teaching?
Yeah, the pandemic has taught academia a lot of things that we kind of know before the pandemic, but now we were suddenly thrown into, and in such a speed that never been done before. And I'm talking about transitioning to remote teaching. So in the documentary, I was trying to illustrate how I was doing that from my own apartment and how I can continue to engage my students in the Zoom environment, in the remote environment. So now that we're not in Zoom anymore, I'm still able to do the same type of engaging activities, getting to know them, knowing their names, those great things that we already know before the pandemic. So what I have learned from that experience is now I have this extra resources, for example, but I can always, for example, if I run out of time, I can record myself via Zoom or some other platform, and I could say deliver high quality education. It might take a little bit of work, but that's really what we do in academia. You know, we go above and beyond. And so the uh, uh, the challenges that comes of the aftermath of the pandemic is are varied. So an example of that is, although as you mentioned, we are now leaving the pandemic mode of isolation and whatnot. You notice people are going back to restaurants these days, but the challenge in academia, the students are not yet fully back on their seats in the classroom. So that might take time. I don't know when it will come back, if we ever get back to baseline, but I miss that. I'd like to see 100% of them on their chairs, interacting with me, engaging, doing things with their peers, myself, because that's really what education is about, right? Learning from one another.
Yeah, and so with the hands-on side of that too, like obviously teaching what you're teaching students remote is definitely difficult. Have you found it to be more difficult now that the pandemic's over, that it's like half split? Some people are coming into learn while some are learning online, and you have to find a way to make sure that both are learning at the same pace. Is that a difficult thing for you to process and continue on with?
Um, Partly, but it's not just on the change from remote and back to in person, but what the pandemic has given us is awareness that our students have simultaneous lives, right? They come to us for education, but they're also living a life, and what that might entail in terms of their engagement is really different now than what we had conceptualized it before. We are a little bit more aware of their emotional challenges, their mental health scenarios. And so we thought about those things before as well, but this time we are a little bit more aware of it because we are collectively dealing with the socioeconomic, mental health, cultural implications of the pandemic. And although the morbidity mortality numbers have significantly changed, the the individual scenarios of people from the social perspective takes time to recover. So yeah, it's a little bit more difficult, takes more effort, trying to support our students to be at their level best.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the positives that you mentioned of how to teach during the pandemic, what you've implemented, there's always the negative side. And we as humans love to go back and to critique ourselves for our decisions and our behaviors that we've made in the past. But many people don't use those critiques as a way to better themselves moving forward. I was wondering if there was any time during the pandemic that we look back on that, due to a decision or, a behavior that you had that you can learn from and what you have learned from that.
Yeah, and that's the question. I think a lot about myself back then and what I am doing now. Um, and I'd like to gently remind myself that moving past post pandemic to be more forgiving. I think is the word, to be more self forgiving and to be more forgiving of others when things does not go as planned. And in our lives, we deal with that. There's traffic, there's subways late, or you spill a cup of coffee on yourself, that sort of thing. In the pandemic, we were put in an environment where we are expected to perform at a certain level, using resources we've never had before or we were not good at. And I personally felt I was underperforming, and I was a little bit hard on myself and saying, gee, I don't know how to use so many of the hundreds of functions in Zoom. And I felt uh, a bit of an imposter sometimes, a little bit of a, I was faking my way through it. And you, you look back and ask, that seems to be a little bit weird. But when you look at the overall scheme of things, you give yourself a nod, you give yourself a pat on the back, and you forgive yourself. And that's what I expect myself to continue to do, and to be able to do that with others. And the other thing I'd like to think of myself as what I have learned from the pandemic is to be more patient of others, to listen, to understand, right? When I say that, I know that many of my students, my colleagues, are going through a lot of social scenarios that I'm barely aware of, and it's very easy to to jump into conclusion of why people are doing certain things, or why they don't show up to class, or why do they say the things they say. So I'd like to tell myself, yeah, I'll be a little bit more patient. And when I think about this, I think about a quote from Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he says that finish each day and be done with it. You have done your best, right? And some blunders and absurdities, no doubt, crept in, but forget them as soon as you can, because tomorrow is a new day, and you're going to start with, a certain spirit and uh, engagement, and you try not to be encumbered with the old nonsense, according to Emerson. So that's my way of inspiring myself to keep going.
Fantastic. So we did talk about the positives and the negatives of going back and learning. And of course, you are a teacher at NYU, but along with that, you are also in the healthcare field. So you do know, about like how we've handled COVID, what we did well, what we didn't, and the response that we had. So in the future, obviously there are going to be more pandemics that pop up. It's just
Mhm.
inevitable through history that things like this happen. Do you
Mhm.
think that this past experience with COVID will help or hurt how we prepare for the next one that happened, given with all the divisiveness we've had versus locking down, not locking down, vaccines, who takes them, who's not? Did we set ourselves up for the future in a good way to be able to combat uh, pandemics later as they emerge?
Yeah, excellent question. I hope that pandemics don't happen too often. And it's not, but what sometimes happens is our the short term memory loss that people might have, and that's the same with any type of public health crisis, right? So with the experience with this pandemic, living through it, we now know there are certain things that are non-negotiable, right? So that's a given, like masking, for example, although the science is telling us conflicting evidence that some says it didn't help, some it said help, the lockdown helped. So, what are we going to do with that experience? Should we come face to face with this again? I think it's important to pay attention to the science, right? Inform ourselves what is the best available evidence that we have, and let's use them. And the public health crisis always tells us something. I mean, my career came of age from the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Before the AIDS epidemic, nobody carried a condom in their wallets, and after the HIV/AIDS epidemic, everybody carried some type of a condom, um, because that was what entails to prevent transmission. So nowadays, I always carry a mask in my backpack or somewhere, although I don't use them as much as I have done in the past. But it's sort of a almost like an amulet, a thing you carry for protection. And we have learned, and we know this even before the pandemic, that hand hygiene is great. Now everybody is doing them. It's just one of the great things that come out of it. And I hope we can continue doing those public health self promotion, health promotion behaviors that we do. The reason we have so much morbidity and mortality of the pandemic is it's really connected to the overall comorbidities of people in the world, and that's people with diabetes, people with respiratory infections. So all of those things that we already know are has to be addressed. We have to control diabetes. We have to manage asthma. Uh, Excess weight is a big issue in the mortality of the COVID. So it's not just an infection control issue; it's an issue of overall uh, impact in chronic diseases.
So we did touch a bit about how the pandemic affected you professionally, whether that be as the teaching or the nursing side. If you're comfortable enough, do you mind going into a little bit of how the pandemic affected you personally? Like, how was your personal life different than what you had experienced in the past, and was it something that you uh, welcomed with open arms to learn from, or what was it a challenging experience for you because nothing like this in our lifetime had ever taken place before?
Yeah, what have I learned from it? I I realized how I did not take much pride of my nursing career before the pandemic. But by that, I mean, we were aware that nurses is the most trusted profession, and that's sort of taken for granted in the last 2 decades. And so when the pandemic came and the public had shown a lot of support and cheerleading for the nurses and the healthcare workers and all the frontline workers. I sort of bask in the glow of that. Although I wasn't frontline and the bedside level, I was frontline in some other ways in the academic field. So I was very pleased and very proud of my colleagues and being part of such a group of professionals who are doing tremendous amount of work. Uh, at the time of the pandemic, I got married during the pandemic, so that was also sort of a memorable experience for me. So, why I choose to get married in the pandemic, it's many reasons, but I, uh, I, I, I thought about, you know, what if COVID actually it came to my mind, what if COVID gets me and I haven't gotten married yet? So okay, let's plan this. That's one of the things that wasn't the only reason why I was getting married. I was with my husband for about 10 years. So it was just that you get to think about yourself and a lot of these things going on at that time. So um the pandemic has given me also an opportunity to continue with something that I love doing, and that is writing, reflective writing. And American Nurse Journal gave me a blog spot. Um, for the past 3 years, I've been writing an essay for the American Nurse Journal. Uh, it to me, it's cathartic. It helps me deal with my scenario, with how I look at my world and how I see my interaction with the profession and my students. So that's a great opportunity for me, and I'm very thankful for that.
Well, congratulations to you and your husband. That's big news,
Thank
and
you.
I'm very happy to hear it. Yes, and also thank you for writing for American Nurse Journal. We here really appreciate your knowledge on the topics that you write for, which is fantastic. So your your marriage comment sort of leads into my next question. If you could go back, probably let's say mid-April of 2020, 1 month into the pandemic, no one really knows what's going on. We don't know how this is going to end. We don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know when the vaccine's going to come, any of this stuff. If you could go back to that moment and talk to yourself and tell yourself then where you are right now, would you have expected to be where you're at?
Would I have to be expected where I am now, you mean?
Yeah.
Um, no, not really. I would say at the time in April, when there were so much unknown, I have uh, learned in April of 2020. One of my former roommates, who is a nurse, was lost to COVID. He was a public health nurse in New Jersey, and he one of the first nurses that I know of who died of COVID, job related. And I attended a funeral through Facebook, and that was such an unusual experience. Looking back at it was bizarre seeing him there on Facebook with the funeral, and I thought, wow, this is it. This is something we didn't expect this. Um, and so you have to process these types of information in the sense that you're thinking about if it happened to him, it could happen to me. And what are we going to do with that? So I did a lot of thinking for myself. Sort of. Uh, Not balancing the account, but sort of looking back and, right, trying to sum up things that I thought meaningful for me in my life at that particular time. And what am I going to do with that information? Right. So I think the, uh, the pandemic, when I look back up to at that time, uh, there's a certain realization that there's things that are more important than our jobs or our little worries in our lives or those types of things. And I think it's a nice reminder, sort of to sort of I'm looking for to balance out our lives, to have that reminder that we've survived this, so we're in a good place and we can get better. So,
Fantastic. So we talked a lot about the past in this interview. Now let's just shift to my final question, which focuses on the other side of that. What does the future hold for you now that this is over? You're going back to the original teaching ways. You're going back to sort of where you were at, but in a completely different place than you were 3 years ago. What does the future hold for you now?
Yeah, I will continue doing my job as a nursing faculty, and I have just recently been selected to take part in the expert panel in rewriting the nursing code of ethics. To me, this is a great opportunity to share my experiences, not just during the pandemic, but as a nurse of over 30 years, to contribute something that is enduring, and that is the revision of the code of ethics. And there's no doubt the expert panel, there's a lot of us in this panel, would reflect on their experiences related to the pandemic and how we can message this into the code of ethics. So I'm very excited because that means I have to study a lot for it. I have to learn the ethical challenges that affects nursing, not just at the bedside, but really all over the scheme of practice. So I am looking forward to continuing writing. And the other thing that I like to do is to mentor a lot of the students that comes my way. Um, Hopefully, I could share with them, cross-pollinate our skills, and be in that learning osmosis where I could learn from my students and they could learn from me. And it's just a great uh, model for lifelong learning, I think. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Congratulations. Thank you so much for doing this, for reconnecting with us after 2 years after American Nurse Heroes came out. We really appreciate this, and congratulations to you and everything that you're done and going to continue to do. You're an inspiration to a lot of people, and we just want to thank you again.
Thank you, Andrew. Great. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Of course, have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Bye bye for now.